particularly honored today to be introducing Representative Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan's 8th District. Representative Slotkin is a distinguished national security practitioner. She served 3 tours in Iraq working for the CIA alongside our military, our deployed folks out there in the field. She served in the Pentagon in a variety of roles, including as acting Assistant Secretary of Defense. Alyssa has a long and storied career. She's a 3rd-generation Michigander from Holly, Michigan, where she grew up on her family farm. And most importantly, perhaps for my purposes, Alyssa now represents the district once represented by my former boss, Congressman Mike Rogers. So, Alyssa, we're so glad to have you, and please come on up. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is a good group for me. This feels like a good home team for me. So thanks for coming in. I want to thank everyone, all the organizers, Jamil, Iram, Representative Will Hurd, thank you for being here. Michael Madsen, Keith Alexander, sir, and for Amazon Web Services and the sort of National Security Institute for putting everything together. I think this is a really important forum and a really important issue. And we all know that if you're here, you've already self-selected into caring about cyber issues. But I do think it's important, as someone who is a national security person who represents a district that's largely rural and suburban, I think it's particularly important that the community back here understand just how many people are watching at the hyper-local level in places like Hamburg Township, Michigan. Population 1,200. I was just there this past weekend. I was meeting with town supervisors, and the issues that they're raising with me are things that are very, very specific to Michigan, our roads, our water, and then they raise cybersecurity. And I think that cybersecurity and cyber issues have a special place in our world because they're very personal. They affect everybody. And because I think people are so unsure what the actual sort of plan is and the way ahead is. So I just want to sort of have a voice from rural America that what you guys do here is really important to communicate back to the middle of the country. And the national security establishment is not known for communicating very well with the middle of the country. And I know that because I was a national security nerd and wonk for 14 years. So I just wanted to put that little plug in there. Obviously, what people are very focused on back home in my district is their private data, their consumer data, their data related to national security, and obviously our adversaries know this. So the proliferation of increasingly sophisticated attacks, some of which have been in the news, many of which have not, is a continued reminder why we must invest in the cyber domain. And again, just by context, this little township of Hamburg was, there was a phishing attack. Someone who didn't know better clicked on it, and they lost the township's data, 1,200 citizens, in the matter of hours. And so they are extremely focused on this issue. We've had a number of ransomware issues in my district where our local governments end up paying ransom. So it is pretty relevant. We all know that our adversaries are very, very good at this, and we need to get ahead of them technologically, but also in terms of manpower and know-how. And this is the one that I think I would foot stomp, particularly now that I'm on the Armed Services Committee and on the Homeland Security Committee, that we must, as a national security establishment, be able to access the best technology. We know that. But if you don't attract and retain the best talent, it doesn't matter what technology you have. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in as a former CIA officer and Pentagon official is making sure our personnel systems keep up with the technology we are expected to use for the warfighter and for the intelligence community. To do this, we must partner with industry. And we must be able to translate the advantage of industry to our warfighters. And I think that what I am particularly interested in is shortening the string between the great ideas, particularly from outside the government, getting it in the hands of the warfighter. I particularly worked on building the Counter-ISIS Coalition and supporting the warfighters in Iraq and Syria. And watching the chain between our SOF in Syria saying, I need this in order to work with our Kurdish allies, in order to be effective, and watching how long that chain was painful. And there's things we can do at the legislative level. There's also things we can do within the Defense Department to shorten that string, and I know a number of you work on those things. I think the other piece that I will tell you I'm just hearing about constantly, and this group, I know we're not focused on this specifically in our panel today, but you are the group who's going to help us figure this out. It's one thing to play defense and to try and defend our networks, to defend our institutions, defend our data. It's another thing to understand what the offensive doctrine is. And I know from my time at the Pentagon that we are still trying to figure out what is the proportional response when there's been a cyber attack against, let's say, our natural gas facilities in Michigan, and God forbid, 25 elderly people freeze to death because of an attack. What is the proportional response for the United States to fight back against that threat, particularly if it comes from a non-state actor? That conundrum, I think, is still being worked on. Nothing would make me happier than to know that the Pentagon is adapting and evolving our doctrine on this. But that is the question I'm being asked by the local leaders in Hamburg Township. When they attack us, what do we do back to them? How do we fight? How do we make sure they just can't do this to us over and over and over again? How do they pay a price? How do I know that my government is pushing back on what feels like an increasingly large number of attacks? I just think it's important, because I know I spoke with a few of the lawyers in the room. There are some very messy issues that come up when we talk about offensive cyber, and I encourage this group to think, yes, about defense, but also about offense. I do think that, particularly now that I'm on the Hill and adjusting to being in the legislative branch, that we need to hear from you all. We do not have the monopoly of knowledge by any means here on Capitol Hill. So coming to events like this is great. I encourage you to try and get in front of the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, your member of Congress, and help educate the body that is the U.S. Congress on the newest and latest. There is no way that we can keep up with the trends that are happening, that you guys are living. But if you don't speak up, you get no credit, right? You got to tell us what you see changing and happening, and feed that information loop. I will just say lastly that you have a really dynamic group of freshman lawmakers who have come into service now. We have almost 100 new freshmen on both sides of the aisle. Many of us, like me, never thought about running for office. I was a national security person who had worked for both the Bush administration and the Obama administration. I worked in the Bush White House and the Obama White House on detail. I think for me, it was just something that became important. My husband's a career Army officer. I have a stepdaughter who's active duty, and the other stepdaughter is a physician for the VA. So it was important for me as a national security person to come forward and put my money where my mouth is and run for something that I had never thought about running for in my life. I would encourage you all to do the same thing in whatever way possible for your voice to be heard in different ways. The national security establishment, I will end where I started, does not communicate what we do and why it's important to the rest of the country. And in my district, if you can't explain how your issue affects people's pocketbooks or their kids, then it'll be interesting but not necessarily relevant to their lives. So for all of you who are at think tanks and organizations, how many of your speaking engagements are outside the Beltway? Just do the math. How many times a year do you go and talk at a local university that's not on a coast? Challenge yourselves. Because I am a representative of Michigan State University. If one of you decided to come to Michigan, it would get statewide billing, right? You would be on the radio as this huge person coming to talk about cyber-related issues at Michigan State. And I will help you do it, but please help communicate what you all are working on outside of the Beltway. If not, we are talking to ourselves. So with that, I will hand it over to our panel here. I think, Jamil, I'm handing it back to you. Thank you for caring about these issues and working on these issues. You have the world's experts here, and thank you for thinking about communicating outside our little world here. Okay? Take care.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And it's now my pleasure. I want to first mention that we are partnered, NSI is partnered today with the Congressional Tech Staff Association, a group of over 300 staffers here on the Hill who are interested and focused on technology issues and getting up to speed on them and educating Congress and their members and other staffers about these critically important issues. I also now want to welcome up Iram Ali. Iram is at Amazon Web Services today now, but she previously served on the House Intelligence Committee, as well as in senior positions at the Department of Defense and at various other government and private sector entities. So with that, Iram, please bring up the panel, and she'll introduce the other members of our panel. Thank you, Iram.
Good morning, everyone. I am really excited and honored to be part of today's event. Thank you, NSI and CTSA, for putting together such a wonderful group of people. We have a lot of diversity here and a lot of, not just in terms of the attendance, but in diversity of thought and action and kind of policy as well. So with that, I'd like to welcome up our panel members. If you'd come up, and I'll have the honor of introducing you all. Is this working? So this morning we have Congressman Will Hurd, who represents Texas's 23rd District of San Antonio, where he was born and raised. He attended Texas A&M University. He majored in computer science, and after college he had the calling to serve and served as an undercover officer in the CIA as a Middle East and South Asia expert for nearly a decade, collecting intelligence that influenced national security agendas for various administrations. Upon leaving the CIA, he became a senior advisor with a cybersecurity firm, which covered a wide range of complex challenges faced by manufacturers, financial institutions, retailers, and critical infrastructure owners, which really harkens back to what Alyssa was talking about how these issues affect everyday lives of the American people. He also was a partner in a strategic advisory firm, helping businesses expand into international markets. He is the first member to serve the 23rd District in Congress for 3 consecutive terms. He was appointed by Speaker Ryan in 2017 to the House Intelligence Committee to replace Representative Mike Pompeo when he went to the CIA. He was also elected by the Republican leader Kevin McCarthy to serve on House Appropriations, and he is a member of subcommittees on military construction and veterans affairs with transportation, housing, and urban development as well. He has been an avid and uncompromising supporter of modernizing the government and bringing technology and innovation to the warfighter. Also on the panel today is retired General Keith Alexander. He's the CEO and president of IronNet Cybersecurity, a firm that provides strategic vision and corporate leaders on cybersecurity issues through the development of cutting-edge technology, consulting, and education and training. His goal at IronNet is to bridge communication systems between private and government sectors to create the next level of intelligence sharing and protect the nation against cyber threats on the global stage. General Alexander is a 4-star general with an impressive 40-year military career, which culminated in the role of the Director of National Security Agency from 2005 to 2014. He holds a distinction of serving in this role longer than any other director. While serving as NSA director, he was appointed by Congress to also be the first commander to lead U.S. Cybercom. He held this role from 2010 to 2014, establishing and defining how our nation is protected against cyber attacks. We're also honored today to have Mike Mattson, who is the Director of Strategic Engagement for DoD's Defense Innovation Unit. Before this role, he served as the Executive Director for the Section 809 Congressional Advisory Panel on Streamlining Acquisition. Prior to this, Mike served for 22 years in the U.S. Air Force, where he led a group of squadron level and is a decorated combat pilot. Mike retired from the Air Force while he was a senior Air Force advisor to the director of CAPE and in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He also served as a division chief and legislative liaison in the Office of Secretary of the Air Force, directly advising Secretary of the Air Force and Chief of Staff of the Air Force on issues before congressional defense committees. So again, thank you all this morning for taking the time out of your busy schedules, and again, all of you for attending as well. So I'd like to start the discussion to learning a little bit about what challenges and threats motivate each of you in your positions and your roles in modernizing government. What keeps you up at night? And we'll start with you, Congressman Hurd.
What keeps me up at night, excuse me, is enough people not recognizing that we are in an actual race when it comes to artificial intelligence. We've seen the stats in the last year. China surpassed the U.S. in investments both in the private and the public sectors. But I would say, and I would posit that the amount of man hours and that went into that, we surpassed us years ago. And so we have to recognize that this is a race. And Vladimir Putin's right, whoever masters artificial intelligence masters the world. And so we need to make sure we're arraying all of our resources against that. Once we accept that mentality, then I think we're going to be able to do what the U.S. always does, lead the way on these areas. And I think that's my biggest concern, is that people recognize that.
Well, you know, I have 16 grandchildren. When they visit, they keep me up at night. So
That's definitely a challenge.
it's definitely a challenge, and I guarantee you they'd bring a noise level into this room. But in cyber, the thing that concerns me the most is we aren't approaching the way we defend our country appropriately. And that is, we don't share, nor can we share, between private industry who's being attacked and the government that can defend. And so the issue right now is we have, if you think of it as an air defense system, we have radar systems that can't see the threat coming in time to block it. And so principally today, we're left with incident response. And I agree with what Congressman Hurd said. AI is going to be a part of that. So we have to come up with a mechanism to see anomalies as they occur, share them with the government so that they can help defend it, and get really good at that, because artificial intelligence will be the backbone and foundation for such a system in the future. The adversary will use AI for attack. We have to get much faster on the defense. We are not there. And so we have to, one, reshape the way we think about defending our country, and two, take the technology that the congressman talked about and make that the backbone of our, think of it as our missile defense, but now our cyber defense capability for our country. And this brings with it a whole host of issues. You know, how do we ensure we're protecting civil liberties and privacy? How do we protect the future of our country? And, you know, it is interesting, I'm not a history person, but when you think about all the things that have happened historically, you know, from the Maginot Line, when the French thought, we have this, we got it, we've got our Maginot Line, and what happened? They attacked elsewhere. And we are not ready for an attack on this nation in cybersecurity, and we have to get out in front of that.
Good morning. So what keeps me up at night is boring stuff. That's right, boring stuff. Why boring stuff? Because boring stuff is the cause of, or the result of, a lack of imagination. And the lack of imagination in the national security context can be fatal. History provides many examples. The general just provided the Maginot Line example. There are many, many more examples, especially in recent history, on the danger of that. Our adversaries are leveraging the imagination of folks outside their traditional acquisition system, outside their traditional government pipelines to get goods to their Department of Defense equivalent. And in fact, our would-be adversaries have a very robust mechanism that very nearly forces dual-use technology to be weaponized, and we certainly don't have that. We need to leverage the triangle of industry, government, and academia that birthed Silicon Valley in the 70s. And we need to leverage the commercial technology as they take on a larger and larger role in research and development investment. We need to leverage the imagination of that commercial industry, not just in Silicon Valley, but in the ecosystems across the country.
Sorry about that. Mike, tell us about what DIU is doing to address the concerns that you heard about, and how does it help in addressing the challenges that are keeping each of you up at night?
General, thank you. So the Defense Innovation Unit was stood up in 2015 by then Secretary Ash Carter to go out and discover technology and then try to back it into a sticky DoD problem. We found that that was not as efficient and as effective as it could be, so we flipped the switch in 2016 where we would take a DoD partner and we'd take a sticky problem they had and cull that down to something that the commercial industry understands, and then put that out to the commercial industry for a creative, imaginative solution. We would look to award a prototype contract within 60 to 90 days. And of that 60 to 90 days, we spent a good part of it really taking that problem from the Department of Defense and getting it down to the problem. Often we had folks come to us with a list of requirements. We don't want a list of requirements. We want to simply state a problem. Or we would have a symptom of a problem. Half a page, one paragraph. I think our record is one sentence. It was a run-on sentence, but one sentence nonetheless, that we put out to the commercial industry. And what we found is, by doing that, we're able to break down some of the institutional barriers from the Department of Defense. For example, if the problem is we need to destroy a ground target, the Air Force is going to come at you with something that has wings for sure. The Army is going to come at you with something that has a tube and wheels or tracks preconceived as that is a solution. And the commercial industry breaks through all that stuff, and we get the creative, imaginative solutions. Another quick example before I continue on, we had a problem that came to us with communicating the fog and friction of war. DoD's solution is thicker foam on the headphone, noise canceling on certain frequencies. What the commercial industry came back with was a company that developed hearing aids with Bluetooth technology, and they developed a 1/4-inch radio transmitter that fits on the tooth and uses the facial bones as a amplification device. Fascinating. So we look to facilitate between the government and commercial industry, award a prototype contract rapidly, 60 to 90 days, and then field that technology within 24 months.
Just got you a new one. So General Alexander, how can industry then help change the culture or perception of government regarding adoption of emerging technologies and cultural hesitance that we have seen in government, specifically in the Department of Defense, quite frankly, to adopt these sorts of technologies and change as rapidly as they need to?
So I think one of the things that industry can do is rapid prototyping and go in with a philosophy that we're going to try a number of different ways, many of which will fail, to come up with one that will succeed. Where in the Defense Department, you're trying to get to a solution right now, and the rest of government. But for industry, the issue is we want to create something to solve this problem. What are the different ways we have to test it? So when you think about changing the way we do cybersecurity, as an example, most of our approaches has been on knowing the threat, the signature. And the issue with that is you have to know the threat, which means somebody has to have been hit with the threat for you to do a reverse engineering of that and create a signature. How about you change that and look for anomalies that are indicative of a threat as it's trying to get in and stop it there, behaviors. Very much more difficult. But it goes, this is where Congressman Hurd and I are much aligned, because you start to change the way we think about it, and all of a sudden you come up with a solution that has artificial intelligence as its foundation and the way to create behaviors and stuff and go much faster. You can't do that with a signature-based system. Think logically. A signature-based system is known knowns. You don't need an AI system to tell you what you already know. That's your left foot. I know. Okay, there's your AI system. But now when you're trying to find anomalies or malicious activity, you want some kind of artificial intelligence system. So how do you grow that? And I think this is where industry and academia that was pointed out is a great way to do this, and then partner with government back. What can government do? From my perspective, what government can do, one, partner with industry to get these things. And I am really grateful that people like Congressman Hurd sit on things like the Aspen Institute to help bridge that gap between government and industry. It is important, from my perspective, to have that understanding so that we can come up with ideas. You might not like them, okay, throw that one away, but come up with the ideas. And I like this approach that we should take, and that is, we're the nation that developed the internet. We ought to be the first ones to secure it, and not just watch what's happening, but fix it.
So Representative Hurd, and what is Congress's role in leading and supporting modernization? And how do you enable a closer public-private cooperation in national security?
For as unsexy as this sounds, IT procurement, right, fixes a lot of this. What Mike was talking about, how DIU was created, the way we're going to develop an ecosystem of cybersecurity companies and practitioners is to articulate a very important problem that can't be solved within government, so that we need to get that into the private sector. But if you want to articulate that problem, it's probably classified, and you can't get people cleared unless they're working on a project. So articulating a problem to a group of people who want to fight for the solution is incredibly hard to do. We're trying to do this in San Antonio at 24th Air Force, called the Cyber Proving Ground. So it starts with, we have to rethink how we do security clearances. And there has to be an ability that when the head of the 24th Air Force has a problem, they turn on a light, a blue light starts going, all these commercial industry folks run into the room, they're able to get on the whiteboard, solve the problem, and you start the clock, bring me a 30, 60, 90-day solution. The head of 24th Air Force should be able to pay for that solution, sole sourced, right? And that's how we ensure we have that level of cooperation. Sounds simple, but there's so many barriers to doing that, and that's why working on the security clearance issue, it shouldn't take 90 days or nine months to do a security clearance. We should be able to do a security clearance in a week. I know there's some innovation that's happening to try to do that. That's one piece. Second piece is we need to be listening. There's a hubris within the government and the intelligence community specifically that we know all. When it comes to the financial services industry, our banks know better where the Russians are getting ready to try to attack their systems than the NSA does. We need to take those assumptions, turn them into intelligence collection requirements, task the NSA, the CIA to go out and get that information, and then we need to be able to share that back to the men and women that are being attacked. That's where information sharing should really be, and information sharing is the start of operational collaboration to where what happens when there's an attack? Who's responsible for what? Who's going to be able to come in and defend that natural gas facility that Congresswoman Slotkin talked about that's being attacked in Michigan? That's where we should be able to get, and it starts with being able to talk about these problems in an environment where you're not violating security clearance rules.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Mattson, the day after the President signed the executive order on AI, the Defense Department released its strategy on AI, and that strategy highlighted DIU as an example of a productive public-private partnership. How does the department's new strategy affect what you're doing? How does it enhance it? How are you looking to implement it?
Well, I think it absolutely enhances what we're doing. It increases or formalizes the investment in those type of technologies that we need to fund. DIU is focused in 5 areas: AI, ML, autonomy, human systems, commercial space, and cyber. And of course, AI is a significant one. So we need to continue to invest in the foundational research and development that allows all the ecosystems across the country to grow. And that collaboration between government and industry has some fantastic precedents that we talked about. The general talked about the internet, also talked about the iPhone, and all the technology in that was founded on that collaboration. Apple did a fantastic job of packaging it, but it's that collaboration. And so by formalizing these type of things in the strategy, in the EO, just formalizes our commitment to rebuild that triangle that really started the ecosystem back in the 70s.
General Alexander, so the executive order and the new strategy from DoD prove that there's clearly been some sort of realization or an awakening, if you, per se, across government and industry as the challenges that have been posed by competition with countries like China and Russia that were mentioned. We've seen a number of efforts to bring modern technology to the warfighter and the intelligence community. Can you share a few of the success stories that you're aware of? That you've been a part of, and what are those lessons that we can take away from that and start to implement elsewhere?
Yeah, I can, and that brings up a great point. I'll hit the real-time regional gateway because that's been publicly talked about, an industry-government approach that when I was the director of NSA, one of the issues that we had was how fast could we get the warfighters information on terrorist attacks against the soldiers there, and sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians. And it took way too long. And they were able to get it from 16 hours down to a minute. And that real-time regional gateway was a partnership between industry and government in doing that. It highlights, I think, the importance of industry working with government. And I put that out because you at times see companies that are shying away from helping the Defense Department or something else. From where I sit, and having served almost 40 years, it's important that industry help our government. And, you know, because what's at risk are the young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and civilians that are out there. And we should do everything that we can to help defend them. So that real-time regional gateway was just such a case. And if you look at the technology used for improving Humvees for blast and roadside attacks, you think about the medicine and what we were able to do in bringing more of our military home. Those were all things that were partnered between industry and government. I think probably the biggest miracle was the medical, and that benefits all of us today in trauma centers around the world. And so there is a lot of good in this. And I think our nation hurts itself when we step back from helping our government. So those are things that in industry, and you know, I know Amazon is a big push in that effort to help. I think we all have to do that, and we need to continue to push forward to help our government because, you know, as Mike is doing, he needs information from industry to help our Defense Department. And we can work on the policies, we can work on do we like what they're doing or not, but at the end of the day, that's our country, and we've got to help them.
Representative Hurd, last September, you and Representative Robin Kelly released a white paper on artificial intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does it fall in line with your recommendation for a national security strategy on AI?
So Robin and I, on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, held half of the hearings on artificial intelligence in Congress. There were 7, and we did 4. And part of what we learned was there's 19 countries that have a national strategy on AI. There's about 5 that are working on them. The United States is not one of them. Now, there is a focus in this administration on artificial intelligence. There's no question about that. We've talked about some of those foundational documents, but the next step is how do we align our research? How do we have to double down on basic research when it comes to artificial intelligence. What are we doing around the enabling technologies that allow artificial intelligence to flourish, things like quantum computing, machine learning, neural networks. And then the third area is how are we preparing to mitigate the risk around AI? That's bias. We should be the ones, America should lead the way when it comes to how artificial intelligence can be used in the future, not China. Because let me tell you, the largest VC deal ever was a Chinese AI company that deals with facial recognition. The Chinese are not trying to make doing development and research in facial recognition to make it easier to buy groceries at the grocery store. They are doing it to keep track of people. They are not using it to stop pedophiles, right? And so the United States should lead on that one. And then ultimately, the government should be the one that is a strong supporter of the development of AI. And we should be, how can we facilitate a moonshot on AI? How can we have a X Prize competition around AI in order to facilitate some of these things, and we have to make sure that we're preparing the workforce for the future for these positions, and that starts with middle school, making sure kids have understand coding. We do not have enough cyber professionals, and we should be looking at things like the Chinese companies that are being supported by Chinese intelligence is funding research from American researchers and professors at American universities. You know, it's crazy. And so this is, we need to have that broad strategy on how cooperation is going to happen between the public sector, the private sector, and academia. And Robin and I are working on that plan, so hopefully we're going to unveil it in a couple of weeks. Let's call it a couple of months. My staff just freaked out there. Yeah, exactly.
So let me just add on, because this is an area for our country that I think we all ought to engage in. And this gets to, how do we address some of these issues? And artificial intelligence is a foundational issue that our country faces. And right now, it's about competition. You know, when you look at, are your children and your grandchildren going to have a better life than you do? It's all about the economy. And how do we compete globally? And to date, and over the past couple decades, we've lost tremendous intellectual property in this regard. Cybersecurity defenses were not where they needed to be. And so the adversary, China in this case, is stealing that and making leaps and bounds on our hard-worked research and development. We've got to address that. But make no mistake that I believe the way to address the future is, you know, educating our people and getting technologies like AI where we are the future of that area, so that our children and grandchildren have a future in this area and not some other country that's stolen it from us. And so it is a fundamental issue that we face as a nation. How are we going to go forward? How do we incentivize people to work in this area? How can the government help do that? And how do we create it? And you know, it's interesting. Dwight D. Eisenhower, no, I did not go to school with him. When he was president, one of the things that he did was they built out the highway system to increase the productivity of this nation. And our country prospered. What's our mission now like that to do? And it's in this internet as part of it. And when you look at the components of the internet, how do we compete globally and incentivize the creation of what the internet will take us? I think that foundational thing that the congressman has brought out is artificial intelligence is one of the key components. We have to be first there, we have to win that, and we have to get out front.
Let me add a couple thoughts also. So the general alluded to an open economy versus a closed economy. Ours is open, would-be adversaries have a closed economy. There is talk sometimes about curbing the openness of our economy for defense, which certainly is a solution, but that would absolutely be to our folly. We would be completely disadvantaged as we try to supercharge the innovation base in our economy. And I see three things. And the first thing is, again, that investment in the foundational technologies we talked about, everything the congressman talked about to enable AI, and he talked about people as well. And a big part of that is data. You need huge amounts of data for AI. And we need to really focus on that as a career field going forward. Data architects, people that are really deeply educated in data cleansing, data architecting, those type of things. Second thing, and we've kind of nibbled around this, is we have to make it easier to do business with the government. It takes a lot of muscle movements to do business with the government. And that's one of the things we're looking to do, is lower the barriers to entry to non-traditional companies where the innovation is and bring that in. And there are a lot of different kinds of barriers. There are barriers that we work with, barriers the Congressman alluded to with the clearance piece. But the flip side of that I've come to learn is we also need to help the DoD be a more sophisticated partner for industry, learning things like business models and that type of thing. It's a bureaucratic structure that tends to move slower and adapts to changing conditions much slower. And we need to be better at that. And then we need to evaluate the commercial technology because we can leverage that commercial technology cheaper and take advantage of a very large market. And finally, we need to be engaged in the discussion. And for me, that means an investment in ourselves. We've talked about it up here. We need to invest in R&D, continue that investment. We need to invest in STEM education. And I don't remember the grade, but if students aren't in the STEM pipeline by, is it 5th or 6th grade, then their chances of entering that STEM pipeline are drastically reduced. So we need to figure out how we do that earlier and highlight programs like the data program that I talked about. And all that is getting back to, again, reinvigorating that triangle that I talked about before about industry, academia, and government.
One quick thing that keeps me up late at night, and Mike talked about it, data, and it's the actual manipulation of the training data that goes into to the machine learning. And because now you have people that are creating data in order to train algorithms, and if anybody's read iRobot, you should if you haven't. And if you haven't, by the way, there's not a Will Smith character. So if you're waiting for that, you're going to be disappointed. It's all about the corruption of data, right? And the fact that that was predicted 40 or 70 years ago. It's pretty amazing.
Could I add one thing onto that? You remind me of something. So I think that we all want the current state of AI development to be like iRobot or Ender's Game. But the reality is, and we all have to face this, that while there are great opportunities, we're probably closer to the current developmental state of something like the 80s game Pong. And I recognize that reference might be lost on half the audience here, so maybe 90s Nintendo.
So we talked a lot about AI. What other technologies are you excited about and want to make sure that are available to our warfighter and the intelligence community? Go ahead.
Well, funny you should ask. I think one of the biggest things that we now need to look at is cloud. And when I look at cloud technology, it's interesting that all the companies that I'm talking to, energy, finance, healthcare, and others, are moving quickly to the cloud. It's cheaper for your internet traffic, your IT infrastructure. You can do more with applications there. And I think you can secure it better. Now, there's work to be done there, but that gives you a redundancy that we didn't have in warfighting when I started out. Now, I'm not going to go where we started out, but back with HF and VHF radios, you think about how we started out, and now think about what our people in the field have. They have iPhones, there's all these different things that they can use. And the cloud and renderings of the cloud, whether it's a private instantiation or a public, so, you know, Amazon and Microsoft all have those kind of capabilities. I think that's the future. And so when we think about evolving that, we actually, as a nation, lead in that area. We ought to drive that really quickly, fix the security, drive that, figure out how to help create a collective security using it. And this gets back to a question that was earlier on energy. What I see in dealing with many of the companies that we've dealt with, they don't have the ability to share information as quickly as it can be. The cloud offers that capability for collective defense. And if you think about it, you can collectively share it for a sector, among sectors, and with the government. It is a huge step for the future. So I am a huge proponent of cloud technology, recognizing that it's one of the steps that we'll go through going into the future.
I would say all these technology allow us to do data visualization in a way that's been unprecedented. I see it right now on the border, what I call the smart wall, where you're able to use all this data from sensors, beam it to a smartphone, and so a member in Border Patrol is able to do pursuit better. This is going to allow us to put that information in a headset so you have a warfighter actually seeing around the corner, seeing inside buildings, that is going to be something that helps the warfighter. And then take it a step further, why are we still using 2D images of brain scans and things like that when you have the ability to understand that in a 3D world? And so the ability that all these technologies, the cloud, artificial intelligence on top of that, to do data visualization is really transformational.
So I mentioned our 5 focus areas before, and we obviously dive deep into those, but we also have our finger on the pulse of the tech sector via tech companies and VCs on the emerging technology, things like power and energy, a lot of advancement in battery size, length, density, those type of things, clear application for Department of Defense. From an operational perspective, grid resiliency, those type of things, which also has an interest from an application in DoD. Also advanced materials, advanced technology materials, high temperature ceramics. We are always keeping our finger on the pulse of those type of emerging technologies and how they apply to a Department of Defense problem set. But also, we look at some of these things as enabling. For example, things like hypersonics, directed energy. There's no company out there that's making a hypersonic weapon. But there are companies that are working on the components that may be applicable to us advancing our modernization in those areas.
So just adding one other in there, because this is, it's interesting. I mentioned the 16 grandchildren, but if you watch these folks, and they're between 7 and whatever, and you go to talk to them, they're all on their iPhone playing Fortnite, right? And you have all heard of that. You can't get them off. They say, no, we can't have supper right now. We're still finishing our game. It never ends. But you watch what they do. None you put over here. We don't have enough cybersecurity people. And you can't get enough people in industry and in government to do cybersecurity. But then you look over here, we have millions of kids that are learning gaming. And we need to make cybersecurity a gaming function that they can easily adapt to and help defend. Because look at how good they are on those controls. They're better than our best military operators on those. You watch these kids, it's amazing. I'm just stunned. They won't even let me play the games because I'm not fast enough. They get in and, think about having something like that in the way we change, the way we think about defending and security. Today, we're reading script. They don't read script. They are immersed in the technology, and we have to be the same.
Adding one thing onto that, with this generation that's growing, the Air Force used to have a single-page SURF, called a SURF, that summarized an individual's career, covered everything: education, flying hours, place you were stationed, languages you spoke. And in fact, they used to track down to the person, the name, people who speak Russian, for example, or Chinese, or Spanish, or whatever, and pay for that as well. And they just made a shift now where they're starting to track people that speak Python and other coding languages in their free time, to do this in their free time, and they're starting to provide stipends and those type of things. So I think that's a great move to recognize how coding languages are going to be as important as foreign languages.
Well, thank you all for answering these questions. It was really dynamic and informative conversation. I'm going to hand it back to Jamil to run some question and answers with the audience.
Great. Well, thanks, Irma. Thank you to the panel, Congressman Hurd, General Alexander, Mr. Madsen. We have about 8 minutes left for questions. So anybody from the audience, thoughts, comments, questions, ideas? Sir.
So the one comment I would have is that I'm a very goal-oriented person, and I see, obviously in the 60s we were able to say, we want to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. We were able to do moonshots, to use your quote. I don't see that happening right now, but I do see that on our adversaries. Using that word with China is a little harsh, but they have things like their Golden Shield projects and their 12 Golden projects, those type of things. They've got timelines behind them, they've got goals behind it, and I think it's setting them up for success, and we're not set up for success because of those lack of goals. I don't know that it's really a question, but I love everything I heard from you as a small vendor. I've talked to him about my issues with my clearance getting reactivated, taking 9 months, et cetera, but I'd like to hear that, but would love to see you guys work on what you can to set, decade-long goals, what we are going to achieve in a decade.
So I think what a realistic goal would be, have sector security in 18 months, that can be shared with the government and collective security between sectors in our government, the critical infrastructure sectors and our government, for a near real-time capability to defend this country in 3 years. I think that's achievable and something we should do.
The problem with goals in the area of artificial intelligence is what is sexy enough for everybody to wrap their head around, right? Gagarin going into space, like that focused everybody's attention in that area. And what is that in artificial intelligence? Some practitioners would say general AI, right? But some of us, maybe half this room knows what general AI is, right? And so trying to capture the imagination of people is hard. You can come up with, certain metrics like all the data within a particular federal agency is going to be made open in a format that can be used by others, right? That's, again, it's an important goal, and we should be setting that. Excuse me, but that sexy thing that everybody's like, wow, what is that? It's hard. I've tried to rack my brain on what that actually looks like, and if anybody has some ideas, herd.house.gov, email me.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think that's exactly right. And the moonshot is kind of back to my thought on investing in ourselves. But I think it's the challenge of find something that resonates with the whole of society. As I alluded to that earlier, it's a whole of society solution. Playing on the AI theme, when functions are transitioned to AI, that first iteration of that is going to be less than what it was before. And then, of course, it's going to exponentially increase. And I think there's going to be a little bit of initial rough time for AI. So finding that goal, that long-term goal that resonates with a vast majority of society, I think is going to be a very important piece.
All right, thanks. Sir?
Really anyone on the panel. Last fall, the Cyber Command announced a expanded mission to conduct offensive cyber actions in defense of critical infrastructure to the grid, for example. Can you discuss the sort of the possible gains from that and any risks that you see, and perhaps the willingness of companies with critical infrastructure franchises to be involved with the government in a more offensive stance in cyber?
Go ahead, you go first.
I'll start, and then we have the expert on this topic correct everything I say. I don't think we should be in a position where the private sector should be doing offensive operations. The government does, and in doing defense. But what we have to change our mindset on, and this is why the split of Cyber Command and NSA is important. You're always going to have tension between intelligence collection and action, right? And a policymaker should make that decision when you potentially erode intelligence in order for the sake of action. And so I think this is where the conversation on offensive is really going, is changing our mindset on what does actionable intelligence actually mean. And I think we have to change the way we think about intelligence we think of human intelligence and signals intelligence one way. I think information and intelligence in cyberspace is more perishable, and it perishes quicker. And so we have to change the way that we think on that. And that is, I think, what I hope the conversations up here in Washington, D.C. On how we do take action on intelligence that we have.
So I'll add to your question, starting out with, I don't know the exact things that were given to Cyber Command. So let me tell you what we wanted when I was there is a set of rules of engagement of what Cyber Command could do to defend the country while we were waiting for further rules from the Secretary and the President for critical infrastructure. So if the nation is under attack, the attacks are going to go in milliseconds. You don't have time to put together a briefing, come down to the Pentagon and then to the White House and get information. You have to make that ahead of time. It's just like missile defense. Yet we didn't have those rules of engagement. I think that's a key thing to put in place. I agree with what Congressman Hurd said about, we need to have these rules. We need to get out in front of that, and we haven't done that. I think the issue on who does this and how they do it is where we set those rules up. I think and I'm convinced that they will be briefed to Congress, and everybody knows what those rules of engagement would be. Private companies cannot attack back. And there's a whole host of reason for that, because the probability that they would attack the wrong place and start a further problem is huge. So that's inherently government responsibility. And so you have to have those rules, but you also have to have the visibility of where those attacks are occurring for the government to act in time. So you need both.
And you have to make decisions on attribution, right? Do you need specific attribution? Can general attribution be enough? I think in a lot of cases, general attribution is sufficient, such as it's the Chinese MSS. It's not have to be, it was kernel such and such from this laptop. So that further complicates this issue of how and who should be responsible for an offensive action.
Great. Ma'am?
Yes, as we all agree that cyberspace has become center stage for international competition and confrontation. And our military cyber threat comes from China and Russia. So, in the view of the cyber war, constitute of acts of war. Now the time being, in the development of artificial intelligence, United States is working together with China. So I have a comment that I think this is a very high risk for the future. So my question is, how do we defend and protect our data for future from China in this respect?
So first thing from my perspective is fix the defense. I think we have to change the way we think about cybersecurity and go beyond a signature-based system to one that does behaviors. Because a signature-based system is one that the adversary knows how to get around by changing the signatures. We're constantly attacked, we're constantly penetrated. Now we have to change that. But that change actually puts us in a good place. Because by changing to a set of unknowns and detecting anomalies, it also sets the framework for developing an artificial intelligence system based on those anomalies that could be extremely useful in defending our country. So my first step would be fix the defense for industry and for our government. We are not where we need to be.
Great. And then the last question, sir.
So we talked a lot about industrial espionage, well, some about industrial espionage, open versus closed systems, and the Bureau of Industry and Security at Commerce is contemplating export restrictions for emerging technologies. And given the sophistication of non-state actors and state actors in terms of industrial espionage, is that type of system where we impose further export restrictions on emerging technologies going to actually hurt our ability to collaborate with international actors or among other companies creatively? Or is that really a defensive strategy that we should be pursuing in terms of having a closed system?
Look, I think it's all the above. I think where some of our focus should be, especially, sorry, some of the where we should be thinking is which are the bad actors that we know they are. It's China, it's Russia, and so when it comes to China, if an American company can't do something in China, a Chinese company shouldn't be allowed to do it in the United States of America. Period. And that changes the game in a pretty significant way, and it puts less pressure on that export control initiative on trying to stop everything from being stolen. There's no such thing as an impenetrable system. We're always going to have to deal with that. And so if you change how the game is being played, that helps us. And so I think that's where some more focus should be when it comes to fighting our adversaries. I don't know the details of the Warner-Rubio bill, but again, simple. If a U.S. company can't do it in China, don't let a Chinese company or entity do it here.
I would just add that I'm really worried about Iran and what's going on in the Middle East. Many of us, spent the last few decades of our career working in the Middle East. And I think what Iran is doing right now is extremely risky and will cause huge problems, not just for us, but for Europe and other countries. And those problems will, I think, be ones that we have not prepared ourselves for. You know, the Middle East is in the crossroads of 3 continents. And if that goes bad, the immigration into Europe will be devastating. And I believe that all the conditions are being set to have it go bad with what you see Iran moving in through Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon, into Yemen. So they start this with attacks in cyber. They've done it in the past, 2012 against Aramco in our financial, and they're still doing it right now in the Middle East. These areas are huge areas for the future, our future welfare. I think we have to look at that in such a way.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Congressman Hurd, General Alexander, and Mr. Madsen for joining us, and thanks to CTSA for co-sponsoring. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.